A green light in Gaza for a general election as Hamas gives in to demands from its rival. Will these concessions spell the end of Palestine's divided loyalties? I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is the prospect of Palestinian unity. It's a division that's lasted a decade. Hamas rules Gaza, and its rival Fatah controls the occupied West Bank. The feud has fueled conflict and could be hurting the plight of Palestinians. It's also prompted criticism that their leaders prioritize power over their people. But now that rift may be healing. Hamas says it's accepted the demands of the Palestinian Authority and the main mediator between the parties, Egypt. Hamas has agreed to dissolve its ruling committee in the Gaza Strip, and for the first time since 2006, Gazans now see an election on the horizon. But why now? Randolph Nogel has more.
It's a schism that started with an election. "2006 was the last time Palestinians made it known who they would like to lead them. 10 years after the fallout between Hamas and Fatah, another election appears to be the only thing that can bring them back together. And while reconciliation efforts have foundered in the past, the blame game has flourished. With Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas 13 years into a 4-year term, and Gaza a few years away from what the UN says will be unlivable conditions, many Palestinians in both territories are politically disillusioned.
We dream of unity, but in practice, we've tried it so many times, once in Mecca, in Qatar, and other initiatives.
The street is not concerned about the Palestinian reconciliation. People's concern is one thing. Why did the water stop? And why was the electricity cut? People are frustrated. After suffering from the siege for 10 years and more, I started hoping that Fatah or Hamas will never come back to Gaza.
Mahmoud Abbas is reviled by many in Gaza for his tactics. And yet, they appear to have worked. It was in March that Hamas set up an administrative council to better govern the Strip, a step regarded by Abbas and his Fatah followers as formally establishing a shadow government. That was when Abbas ratcheted up the pressure. He cut off payments for electricity in Gaza and slashed salaries of unemployed Palestinian Authority workers living in the Strip. Abbas also cut payments for Hamas prisoners in Israeli jails, reduced medical supply shipments, and announced that more than 6,000 PA workers would be forced into early retirement.
I think the ball is now in President Abbas's court. He has to make the necessary decisions to complete the reconciliation, such as ending punitive measures against the Gaza Strip.
Now that Hamas has agreed to dissolve that council, the question is whether the group will agree to place its security forces under Abbas's control. And while rapprochement was the intended goal, Abbas may be wondering if he should have been more careful with what he wished for. His victory over Hamas weighed down by heavy baggage, responsibility for a territory on the brink of collapse, more friction with a bristly US-Israeli alliance, and new elections that could see his party overrun, as they were a decade ago. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, to get more on this, I'm joined now from Gaza by Ahmed Yusuf. He's a former senior advisor to the leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh. He also directs the House of Wisdom Institution for Conflict Resolution and Governance. And in Ramallah, in the occupied West Bank, we have Issam Aruri. He's the executive director of the Jerusalem Legal Aid and Human Rights Center. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Ahmed Yusuf, if I can begin with you, sir. We've seen reconciliation deals in the past, in Mecca, in Sana'a, in Cairo, in Doha, in Cairo again, in Shati refugee camp. Why should we believe that it's going to work this time around when it failed all those other times?
Yes, we should believe that this time we hope that it's going to be work. 10 years of failed attempts between Fatah and Hamas to reconcile their rift. This time they lost confidence on the street. Nobody anymore respecting the two parties. Nobody accepting to continue this way. They became fed up of these failed attempts. So the pressure from the street became very high. And it's like Gaza became like a Pandora box. You either try to find a solution to very miserable life, or otherwise the people will revolt against the situation. Not just here in Gaza, we know that also the situation very bad in the West Bank. So I think both have been realized that they have to find a solution. They have to bridge the gap and stop hindering the national reconciliation from achieving their goals. So I do believe this time the level of seriousness is more than any time before. And also we both build a confidence in the Egyptian role. In the past, maybe Egypt wasn't, they've been taking sides, and they've not been honest enough on both sides. But this time we trust Egypt, and we tested them in the last couple of months. They've been trustworthy, and that's why we can go ahead and telling Egypt, you go ahead, you are the interlocutor, we trusted you, and we accept what you suggest for both of us.
Issam Aruri, are you as confident that this is going to work this time around? Because it seems as if, as we heard in that report, the ball is now in Fatah or the PA's court, because Hamas have done their part. They've dissolved that committee. They're saying, okay, your move, PA. Is this going to work, Issam?
I'm not sure if it will work or not. As a matter of fact, most Palestinians are welcoming this, and they are happy for this development. But most of people are still dealing cautiously with this development, because what you indicated, there was so many reconciliations in the past that did not work and did not continue. We don't know what's new this time. We can see that there is more seriousness from the Egyptian government. There are more pressures on the ground on all parties, but still we need to be cautious. Even the mentality that if parties will start to kick the ball into each other's field, that happened in the past, and if it will continue, I think this will end up with some other reconciliations in the past, unless we deal with all the details and the results and the impact that affected the people's lives either in the West Bank or in Gaza, and more importantly in Gaza.
Ahmed Yusuf, help me understand this. Did Hamas take this decision because Gaza became ungovernable, because it became too difficult? I remember when I was in Gaza, people were saying, hey, we're getting 4 hours of electricity per day. Civil servants are not getting paid. We blame Fatah and we blame Hamas. We blame everybody. This is a big mess. Was Hamas forced into this because they couldn't control Gaza anymore and the people were turning against them?
No, there are many other reasons that pushed Hamas to take that serious decision and accept what the Egyptian has been proposed for them. And I do believe that the situation in Gaza helped in that decision, because the situation became unbearable and people are suffering a lot. And because most important is that we lost actually the confidence on the whole Palestinian project, we lost confidence also on our authority. And the Palestinian cause has been losing, and the Israeli is the only one who benefiting from the situation that Palestinian became divided, and they are not be able to work hand in hand. The situation that the Palestinian project is not anymore being taken seriously by the world community or by the region, and everybody has become busy with certain things away from our Palestinian project and the needs to do certain things to make the Palestinian issue at the top of the Arabs' agenda and Muslims' agenda. That's also the way that we're seeing the retreatment, or that we are losing on both global and regional level, that making the people to believe that if we are not making concession right now, then the whole Palestinian project will be a failure.
Mr. Yusuf, I have an interesting question for you. Let's park aside the international reputation of Hamas and what the world thinks. But what I'm very interested in is in the fact that you believe that Hamas lost a lot of the street, right? A lot of people, particularly in Gaza, might not see Hamas in the same positive light anymore. Because it suggests to me that maybe the siege worked. Israel blocked off Gaza. The Egyptians helped them block off Gaza. The theory behind the siege was you squeeze the strip for as long as possible until the people turn on Hamas. And now, aren't we seeing that? So didn't the siege work?
Yes, of course. Actually, the division weakened the whole Palestinian question, and the Palestinian people in Gaza, they are not angels. We are human beings. We have certain demands that the authority should make sure that it's available for the people. The unemployment rate is more than 60%. Who can afford that? People are suffering. We don't have a qualified hospital to treat the people, providing medical treatment to the people. And the crossing, most of the time being closed. Electricity is just working for 2 or 3 hours a day. This is not a life that anybody can afford. So that's why we have to listen to the demands of the people, and making this kind of concession that making maybe there is something much better could come. We have to give the people a glimmer of hope to continue their resilience against to the occupation, and to steadfast and to stand behind the movement. Otherwise, we're going to lose everything. Yes, Hamas and Fatah, both of them have been lost a lot of their supporter. Yani Hamas and Fatah, every party has lost at least the best they can get, maybe 25 to 26% from the Palestinian voters. Yani. So we know that we both losing, and we have to come together, to work together, and to strengthening our unity to keep the Palestinian resilient, and also be able to stand against the occupation, and also to be able to defend the Palestinian people if there is any Israeli aggression against Gaza.
So let me ask Issam Aruri, since elections were brought up, if there was an election very soon, how do you think it will turn out? Who will the people vote for?
I think it's early to predict, and I am not sure that Israel will allow unified elections to be held in the West Bank and Gaza, a unified one. Israel is observing, and Israel was the first obstacle that pushed towards this division. By arresting, and till now it continues to arrest Palestinian legislators, not allowing, restricting even the movement of elected people. Israel has its own project of annexation and building its apartheid system. Israel doesn't want a 2 states or a 1 state solution. Israel doesn't want the Palestinians to enjoy any equal status at this part of the world. It will continue its project, and I guess Israel will not allow fair and honest elections to be held both in the West Bank and Gaza. But if it allows till now, there is no agreement on the electoral system that will be implemented, because we have different laws applicable to this, and that leads us to the legislations that took place differently on two tracks in the last 10 years in the West Bank and Gaza, to start with agreeing on the electoral system. After that, I think we can then talk about expectations and what might happen. Till now, now it's almost 11 years that the last elections took place, and that means that all the generation 30 years or below did not participate in those elections. In a young community like the Palestinian community, where 72% of the population is under 30, it's unpredictable what this generation might vote for.
Right. Ahmed Yusuf, as part of a reconciliation deal, the president, Mahmoud Abbas, would want to have control over all the security forces. Realistically speaking, would Hamas ever allow those security forces to be under Abbas?
I don't think so. Yani, this is a matter, depends on the level of trust that we can build with the President Abbas. We are not going to surrender all the things that we built all these years to defend Gaza, and as a tool for liberation, give it to somebody that he doesn't have that much trust among the Palestinians when it comes to their weapons, the way that they should keep to defend themselves. So I don't think this is an issue on the table. This is something that maybe the Egyptian, the interlocutor, will try to find a way how to coordinate and cooperate with Hamas, how to make sure that this issue, the military or the military might of Hamas, yani, can be handled in the way that not to give others something to reject the national reconciliation. I do believe that the Egyptian, they have been discussing these things with the people of Hamas, and they have reached a conclusion that they should be in the hands of Hamas to protect and defend the Palestinian in Gaza. And if there is something to have controlling the military wing of Hamas, this is something could be come as a coordination and discussion and dialogue between Hamas and the interlocutor, and also between Hamas and President Abbas. Yani. So I don't think this is something easy. Hamas will surrender to Abu Mazen because the level of trust is not exist yet.
Well, as they say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We'll have to watch this closely and wait and see as to how this unfolds between Hamas and Fatah. But for the moment, on paper, there's a prospect of reconciliation. Let's see how it goes for Gazans, for people, for Palestinians who live in the occupied West Bank and elsewhere. Ahmed Yusuf and Essam Aruri, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Still ahead, there's less than a week to go until northern Iraq's Kurdish region votes on independence. But will Baghdad block it? And Rohingya refugees blamed for their own ethnic cleansing. We get the latest on the crisis from a Rohingya community leader who's been targeted by Myanmar's security services. Welcome back to the Newsmakers. In a week's time, people in the Kurdish region of northern Iraq are set to have their say on whether to break away from Baghdad. Kurds are often called the largest ethnic group without a nation-state of their own. And for many of them, this referendum could be a tangible step towards that goal. But as their calls for independence grow louder, so too do the voices of opposition from almost every major power in the region. Their biggest concern, that the vote will only inflame tensions in a place already racked by conflict.
An aspiration, decades in the making, could now become a reality for Iraq's Kurdish population. On September 25th, Iraq's semi-autonomous Kurdish region is voting in a referendum on statehood. The vote will impact an area extending from Kirkuk, which is claimed by both Baghdad and Erbil, to Iraq's borders with Syria, Turkey, and Iran. Baghdad says the referendum is unconstitutional, and that if it goes ahead, it will leave Iraq's central government no choice but to use force.
To protect our Kurdish population and our Arab and Turkoman and other ethnic population of our own country. If they are threatened by using force outside the law, then we will intervene militarily.
Turkey, Syria, and Iran fear a referendum in northern Iraq will disrupt regional security. But despite resistance from both regional and international allies, the Kurdish Regional Government says it will go ahead with the referendum.
It's clear that this is not a decision by a person or a political party, 2 or 3. This is the decision of the Kurdish people.
The U.S. is asking for a delay of the vote, pushing instead for more talks between Erbil and Baghdad. Iraq is a vital regional partner in the fight against Daesh, and the U.S. fears conflict could jeopardize those operations. There are also concerns that any conflict resulting from a referendum could threaten Iraq's oil exports, which both Erbil and Baghdad rely on heavily for income. So as Iraq's Kurds press ahead, another question is coming into focus: whether the pursuit of self-determination can continue without becoming a nightmare. Basil Rayhan, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss what's at stake, I'm joined now from the capital of the Kurdish Regional Government, Erbil, by Mahmoud Uthman. He's a former member of the Iraqi parliament and also a former head of the Kurdistan Socialist Party. And in Baghdad, Ali Ad-Dabagh, he's a former spokesman for the Iraqi government. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Mahmoud Uthman, this referendum, a lot of people think it's a bad idea. Tell me why you disagree.
Well, first of all, greetings to you and to my friend Ali Dabagh in Baghdad. Actually, this referendum came because the outstanding problems between Erbil and Baghdad were not solved since about 10 years or more than 10 years. Always discussions, no solution, no results. So that led to the referendum, and constitution was not applied as it should be. That's why this came. So now the solution is, if those problems are solved and Kurds are given a guarantee that this will be solved for them, that may affect as an alternative the situation and could be a good alternative to the Kurds.
So help me understand what the plan is. To have the referendum, to get a yes vote, and then use that as a negotiating tactic against Baghdad to say, well, maybe we don't want independence, but give us more autonomy. Is that tactical?
Well, anyway, I think it could be before, it could be after the referendum. If there is a guarantee or a promise that the problems are solved and the UN or an outside body could supervise this, or could be a third party. But if nothing happens before or after, then referendum will take place, and there may be problems also between Kurds and the Iraqi side, especially in the areas which are called the disputed areas.
Yeah.
So I hope things will be solved one way or another through dialogue.
Okay, you say supervising body, but who are you going to trust as a supervising body? Because let's take Baghdad and put it aside. Put the Iraqi central government aside. You have Turkey, Iran, the United States, the UN Secretary General, all of them coming out and saying this referendum is a bad idea. It shouldn't happen. So who are you going to trust as a supervisor if everybody is on the other side when it comes to this issue, Mr. Uthman?
Well, I think UN could be a supervisor, and America and Iran, these two countries have a lot of interest in Iraq, and they have an influence in Iraq also. They could help, of course.
Okay. Ali Dabagh, if they want to go, why don't you let them go?
Thank you very much. A greeting for my colleague, Mr. Mahmoud. About the constitution, I think the autonomous regional Kurdistan, they took the full power since 2003. They had all the powers in Baghdad, and Baghdad federal government, they have even no power to employ one policeman in the Kurdistan. So all the powers has been getting, there is nothing to complain about the power and the implementation of the constitution. First of all, the Kurds, they had choose to be part, they had vote on the referendum in 2005 on the Iraqi constitution, which make Iraq as a federal government. They choose to be part of this country, which doesn't allow one side, whether it is a region or a governorate, to vote for independence or to be an independence. So it is unconstitutional that they will do. Plus that the issue is of the border. They are talking about the Kirkuk and beyond Kirkuk even, and this is the biggest problem which is going to be created instability. It's going to disrupt the stability of the Kurdistan, which proportionally it is much better than what we had in Baghdad or the other places. So they cannot swallow that, you know, taking the full Kirkuk, which is part of it, Arab and Turkmen and of course Kurd. So in the constitution, Kirkuk is cosmopolitan, is not part of the Kurdistan. So they are imposing now to have a vote for the referendum in Kirkuk and a part of the Diyala and part of side of the Mosul.
Certainly, and these are disputed.
Again, this is going to be created.
Certainly, these are disputed border provinces, which a lot of people who actually support the referendum felt shouldn't have been included in the referendum. But I don't want to get into that for the moment. But it's well understood that both of you have mentioned the disputed provinces. Let me ask you, Mr. Dabbagh, when Barzani says we refuse to be their servants, do you think he's just making it up? Or maybe he represents a certain feeling amongst many Kurds in northern Iraq as if they don't have full autonomy and full rights. That's why they want their own country.
Well, my friend, the time gone for each, not to the Kurd, even any Iraqi to be as a servant. Never. All of us are in one country and all equal, and the constitution make us all equal. There is no, you could see that Kurdistan, they, in the constitution-wise, they have many powers they should be to the federal government. Like, for example, they are exporting oil. They are not only exporting, they are smuggling oil to Iran and to other places. And this is, again, it's unconstitutional. But again, Iraq didn't, Baghdad government in all the time, they didn't take any measure, a force measure in order to stop that. So when we talk about the constitution and the implementation of the constitution, right, we do agree. There is a many problems and difficulties due to the challenges in Iraq. But again, it is that challenges didn't allow that to make, we don't deny the dream of the Kurd to have their, a state. But again, imposing this way of independence on Iraq, on a country in this way, in this time, I think it is.
But Mr. Dabbagh, you say we don't deny. I'm sorry, but you say we don't deny. You're basically saying you have a right, but now is not the time. However, when I look at what's happened recently, the Iraq Supreme Court ordering the suspension of the referendum, right? So they're told, listen, this is completely unconstitutional. This is completely illegal. The Iraqi parliament voting to sack the governor of Kirkuk because he wants to go ahead with the referendum. When Haider al-Abadi comes out, and these are his words, not mine, he says, we will be taking all measures. We won't allow for Iraq to be divided. We will be willing to use force if necessary. This is very, very tough talk, which suggests maybe to people who are on the fence in northern Iraq, if this referendum goes ahead, maybe if they were on the fence, maybe they'll end up voting for independence because they see Baghdad as being so heavy-handed when it comes to its response.
Well, the government of Baghdad, constitutionally, they have to set the peace in many places. If the referendum create instability, for example, let us take Kirkuk, which the people refuse, the non-Kurd people, they refuse the referendum. And if it comes as like a strife in Kirkuk, of course the government of Baghdad have to interfere and to stop any sort of the instability. This is part of their constitutional order. They have to. I'm not talking about the dream. Nobody against the dream of the Kurd, but again, there is something which the Kurds had agreed to be part of this country, of Iraq federal country, and they choose to be. I just want to remind you, in 2005, they had a similar referendum, and it was 98%. They said that we do need to not to be part of Iraq. But even though the Kurds choose to vote for the constitution and to be part of the Iraq federal country, now they choose lonely. From one side step, they choose to be not part, and it is not up to them to do.
Let me take a point that you made. Let me take a point that you made and pose it to Mahmoud Othman. What about the Sunni Arabs, the Turkmen, the Christian Arabs who are in a place like Kirkuk, who want to be a part of the broader umbrella of Iraq? They don't want to be in a Kurdish country. What about their futures? Does it not matter because they're not the majority?
Well, listen, first of all, this referendum is a free thing. I mean, nobody is forced to vote. They are free to vote or not to vote. When the vote is made, then you have this, and then there will be negotiation with the Iraqi government. Kurds always say that they will do nothing without agreement with Baghdad, and there will be no violence at all as far as the Kurds are concerned. So there is nothing wrong with taking the opinion of a people. They tried to take it 2004, and then they said no. 2005, they said no. 2009, they said no. Then when they should take it? That's why I think the reactions, which are heavy-handed, they are not justifiable, really. I mean, why in 2 days, a decision from the court, a decision from parliament, a decision from Ibadi, from everybody outside, as if we had committed a very big crime. I think there's nothing wrong with taking the opinion of your people to see what do they want, and people will be free to vote or not to vote, and then go into serious negotiation with Iraq, with outside country, with neighboring countries.
Okay.
To decide on something about the Kurdish ambitions.
Okay. Mr. Dabagh, you want to
Can I comment on this?
Yes, sure.
Yes. In the constitution, the referendum is being specified clearly for the governorate, which is not part of the region. For 1 to 3 governorate, they could vote. It is being defined in the constitution what is the referendum. When anyone wants to make any referendum in any type or any sort, it is not up to him. All right, it is free, but it is unconstitutional that to take such a step by one side, like for Basra, they choose to make a referendum by their own without following the steps which is being defined in the constitution. This is the objection. We said it is unconstitutional because you didn't follow, Mr. Uthman. Masoud Barzani didn't follow the steps which is defined in the constitution for this referendum.
Let me ask one final question to Mahmoud Othman here. I want to talk about the elephant in the room, Daesh, because this is at the genesis of the fears not only of the Iraqi government, but many of the other countries. They feel you have this apocalyptic death cult that emerged in the region. It took over almost a third of your country at a point in time. Finally, the momentum is against them. They're on the run. This group of fighters are on the run. Their capital is being dismantled, and just at a time when not just the Iraqis, but the entire international community is getting close to defeating Daesh, you guys want to destabilize everything else, and you want to have a referendum which might give Daesh some breathing space and might give them an opportunity to get back into the vacuum again. Isn't that a fair fear from all these different parties, Mr. Uthman?
Well, you see, we understand the fear of other parties, but Kurds have confirmed that their fight against Daesh will continue. Nothing will be delayed because of a referendum which will take only 1 day, not more. This is one. Secondly, the constitution which Mr. Dabagh talks about has not been implemented in Iraq. Sunnis are complaining, Kurds are complaining, others are complaining. That's why we are bound together by the Constitution, but it's not implemented as it should be. That's why each side feels free to go towards its ambitions as long as the Constitution is not implemented. If the Constitution is implemented, then nobody will have any complaint. That's why I think there should be serious negotiations between Baghdad and Erbil with all other components of Iraq to discuss everything, every point of view, and if there is a possibility that a third party will supervise it, I think then maybe they will reach a solution.
Okay, well, they're running out of time.
If you say something and then...
Certainly, they are running out of time and we are running out of time. If there is going to be an agreement before this happens, they've only got a week. They've got less than a week, so they're running out of time. We'll be following this closely as to whether the referendum happens, and if it does, what the permutations will be. For the moment, I've got to thank both of you gentlemen. We would love to have you back on the program, Mahmoud Uthman and Ali Ad-Dabbagh. I thank you both for joining us. Well, aside from the Kurds, one of the other major ethnic groups in northern Iraq is the Turkmen. For their perspective on the referendum, I'm joined now from London by Sundus Abbas. She's the president of the Iraqi Turkmen platform in Europe. Thanks so much for joining us, Ms. Abbas. First, off the bat, let me ask you what you thought of the discussion with the two gentlemen just before you. Anything stand out for you?
Well, as a referendum, you know, they talked about lots of issues in here, and some of them is just like they emphasizing one of the Constitution articles which haven't been implemented. Yes, that's true. It hasn't been implemented, so as lots of articles in the Constitution. And I don't think it's the time and the right time to emphasize this point, and it doesn't justify the action by taking a referendum forward.
Let me ask you about what Masoud Barzani had said with regards the fears that other ethnic minorities will be persecuted, particularly in a place like Kirkuk. He said, we don't say that Kirkuk only belongs to Kurds. Kirkuk should be a symbol of coexistence for all ethnicities. Why don't you believe him?
Well, why don't they agree that to make it as a special state for Kirkuk itself? Why they wanted to be part of Kurdistan? For the recent or for the last years, we didn't have the dynamic of trust between Turkmen and Kurds. Let us undermine that, not undermine what's happening in Kirkuk. Since 2003, all the Turkmen have been marginalized from all the positions to run the country, if it's like economically, a city, if it's like economically or in security-wise. And a part of that, the city itself has faced a huge demographical change since 2003 until today. We've seen the Kirkuk size have been doubled, and even the residents in the Kirkuk itself have been doubled as well, just from the Kurdish side. So when Dr. Uthman, he's mentioning now, nobody has to be afraid of voting if everybody has the right to vote freely. Yes, of course, because they guaranteed the vote is going to be yes, because they increase the size of Kurds in here, and this is the last steps to have a referendum and to get yes out of it.
Less than a week to go. They have been, those who are pushing for the referendum, they've been smothered by condemnation from Baghdad and from the international community. We mentioned it when I chatted to the other two gentlemen. Not only the United States, not only Turkey, Iran, even the UN Secretary General. Does all of that encourage you?
Well, I think Kurds, they are very good in you know, political blackmail, and they've done it before. And I think this is one of the cards they are using to blackmail the central government. Let us not forget that there is two elements involved in this. One of them is the Kurdish, the government itself. They have their own issue. One of them, the president himself, have run out his term, and the parliament hasn't been held for 2 years, and they have their own financial problem. So to drive away the size from all this internal problem, to the referendum. This is one of the reasons. And the second reason is the weak central government in Baghdad, especially with the terrorist group having lots of parts of Iraq, and the recent defeat of the ISIS group. They made them to think that this is the right time. If we haven't done it now, it won't happen later on when they get rid of the ISIS group, and it will be stronger.
Okay, Sundus Abbas, it's been good to get the Turkmen perspective. Thank you very much for joining us from London.
Thank you.
Myanmar's military kill our people. They chop men to death. We don't want to stay here. We want to go back to our country when there is peace. We want to live in Myanmar. We don't want anything. We just want to go to our land. This time, we're bound to come here to Bangladesh.
Thousands of Rohingya Muslims continue to stream into Bangladesh, and with them come new accounts of violence and torture. They're fleeing a brutal military offensive in their home in Myanmar's Rakhine state. The UN calls what's happening there ethnic cleansing, but Myanmar's top general has blamed the violence on the Rohingya themselves. General Min Aung Hlaing says the army is merely responding to attacks by Rohingya fighters, and now those who fled are finding themselves increasingly deserted by the international community. The Indian government has told its Supreme Court that Rohingya refugees in India pose a security threat and must be deported. That verdict has been postponed until October. Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Dr. Hla Myint. He's the spokesperson for the Arakan Rohingya National Organization. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Myint. So, let me first ask you about what General Min Aung Hlaing said. The Rohingya have never been an ethnic group. He's accused extremists of trying to form a stronghold in northern Rakhine state, echoing by and large what Aung San Suu Kyi and others have said. How do you feel about that when you hear it?
His response is a blanket denial. He's in a state of denial. Rohingya has been living there long before the creation of Burma, perhaps even long before the Rakhine. He's making a blanket denial. He's in a state of denial, I believe.
State of denial. Now, one thing that did happen on August 25th, there was an attack.
Well,
on military outposts and police stations. Let me ask. ARSA, right, or Haraka al-Yaqin, right? They exist, they're reality. They've done things against the Myanmar security forces. Now, these guys might be using it as a pretext, and there is a humanitarian catastrophe, and there's terrible things going on. But to what extent are ARSA harming the situation for ordinary Rohingya people who are living
First of all, before we go to your point, let me highlight some of the key points here as to why ARSA was surfaced on the ground, or as to why the ARSA has emerged on the ground. Because of, it's like, popular uprising in inmates like Nazi concentrations. Rohingyas' rights have been systematically denied. Rohingyas' people's movement was systematically restricted over the last 50, 60 years. Okay?
That's all true. That's all granted. Absolutely granted, yes.
So on top of that, there have been 4 or 5 exodus over the history of 50 years. The last one was to 2012. And in 2012, what they did, they made 150,000 Rohingyas homeless in situ.
Yeah.
Okay? And then international community was unable to address the underlying suffering cause of the Rohingya people. Burma was always protected by some regional allies, China, okay? So there are some groups on the ground, okay, things that their grievances have not been addressed. So therefore, the handful number of people think that it is high time for them to take justice into their own hand. So nobody condoned that, but it's happened naturally. Isn't it the case in Northern Ireland? Isn't it the case in the rest of the world?
No, and you're giving a bunch of different conflicts. And again, let me state very clearly here. I absolutely understand. I don't think, I think most of our viewers absolutely understand the context within which this has emerged.
Okay.
There's a New York Times piece that just came out that says, quoting fighters who fled to Bangladesh, nearly every Rohingya village in northern Rakhine now has an ARSA cell with at least 10 members. Now, I ask you again, it's happening, there's a context. These people have been persecuted to the ends of the earth. Now there's this group that has emerged. People are picking up weapons. When they attack the security forces of Myanmar, is it harming the situation? Is it making it worse because it's giving the government a pretext to absolutely pummel the Rohingya?
Well, the government wants that from the beginning, from the day one, they planned that. they have engineered this all scenario from the day one.
How did they engineer it?
Well, I think 2 weeks prior to the violence took place, the government deployed thousands of troops in Rakhine state. They started to intimidate the Rohingya residents. Okay, they started to rape Rohingya women. It was happening long before the sparking date of the incident.
Right.
So this was they're trying to looking for a triggering point. You know, again, I have to go back to the other international conflict in context that they're always looking for a triggering point. From that triggering point, they escalate the violence into a wider scale. Now, what's happening on the ground is a genocide, textbook speaking, not ethnic cleansing.
Right. I mean, the UN at the moment calls it an ethnic cleansing.
They call it a humanitarian catastrophe. That's why they want to save the face of Aung San Suu Kyi.
But also, I mean, would you maybe grant it to them that for genocide you have to absolutely prove intent, and it's a high standard?
If you see the history, there is an intent. There's a widespread systematic persecution of Rohingya people.
Right.
If you're a Rohingya, you're not allowed to marry. If you're a Rohingya, you're not allowed to make movement. But those perpetrators are also well educated. They do bear in mind that they cannot do as aggressively as the Nazis. They cannot do as aggressively as what happened in Rwanda. They cannot do as aggressive as the Serbians did against the Bosnian people.
Right. If it gets labeled genocide,
if they do so, they will caught upon the international radar of genocide detection.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because if the word genocide becomes legally applicable and the international community accepts it, it's going to be interesting to see how the Chinese, for example, respond. Because, okay, you have all these players at the UN right now. Everybody's there, talk shop, right?
If I may, for
everybody's there. The Chinese are going to block any resolution at the UN Security Council.
Tradition.
The Russians will probably block. India is a big country, a big player. The Indians are saying, hey, Aung San Suu Kyi, hey, Myanmar, you guys are fighting terrorists, we're supporting you. With all of that in mind, don't you lose hope? Don't you feel as if nothing can be done because all these big players are protecting Myanmar, and the other players, like the United States, don't care enough to want to intervene or do anything about it?
There are some incidents where, to the best of my knowledge, you would know as well, there are some incidents that intervention took place without the approval of Security Council.
So who's going to intervene?
I don't know. The international community has to act upon it. Particularly, Bangladesh has to take the initiative stage.
But what can Bangladesh do? I mean, they have people. You've seen the pictures in Cox's Bazar.
Yeah.
Bangladesh is a poor country. They have a lot of problems to deal with.
Bangladesh is a poor country. If you're a poor man, you have disease, you need to get a cure.
But what do you want Bangladesh to do?
To lobby the international community so that they can put exerted pressure on Burma and to create a safe zone within Burma for the Rohingya people, civilians, to protect the Rohingya people.
Okay, so let me ask you again. If, as things stand with the United Nations Security Council, it's going to be impossible to get a resolution for intervention, right, against Myanmar's government.
It is difficult, not impossible.
Near impossible, right? Who do you think will intervene? Give me one country's name that you think will actually send troops into Myanmar to stop what's going on.
Well, practically speaking, it's seemingly not possible. But in principle, there are lots of the events that have been taking place throughout the histories, okay? You have to go back according to the context.
And is that what you want? You want a country. Let's take a name. France. You want France to go in with troops to stop what's going on.
And to create a safe area, safe zone. Okay, safe zone for the protection of Rohingya civilians. Okay, and there's also an emerging international norm known as responsibility to protect.
Yes.
And responsibility to protect.
Who's going to enact R2P?
Yes. Yeah. Well,
who's going to do it? Give me one country. Name a country that you think realistically can do this.
We don't have to give one name, okay? One name should be Turkey, and another one is Bangladesh. They can lobby it. They cannot have to do it in a singular country basis, okay? What they can do, yes, Security Council is paralyzed. I agree with you. You know what happened in 1950 when they weren't able to pass a resolution through a Security Council? They called for the Uniting for Peace in General Assembly. In 1950, when there was a Korean War,
yes,
they said, okay, Security Council is paralyzed. Now what we're going to do, we'll try to pass this motion in General Assembly for the sake of getting united, for the sake of peace in the world. Similar thing can happen. People have to have, the nation states have to have the political will.
In the absence of the political will, would any help, I mean, Turkey's sending help now. Turkey's trying to help Bangladesh deal with the humanitarian crisis on their side of the border. In the absence of the political will, and in the absence of big players actually condemning Aung San Suu Kyi and the generals, people respond as if Rakhine state has been hit by an earthquake or a tornado, right? Can anything really be done?
Well, okay, if you talk about tornado and earthquake, let me remind you what happened. Do you know what happened in 2008, Nargis crisis? The aid was blocked by the same government who is now
right, of course,
claiming themselves as Democrats.
Sure, certainly, but they've changed a lot. You'll accept that.
And France said we will then make an intervention.
Right.
In 2008, through the R2P norm.
So you feel if France, when they didn't want aid in 2008, when they were military junta, and France suggested that they might want to intervene, you feel France should also be talking about intervening now?
Why not? We're also human beings. Now, why not? It is not only, it shouldn't be only France. It should be the whole international community. They have the collective responsibility to protect these defenders people, as what happened in Kosovo, as what happened in Bosnia, okay? Because Security Council is it's very politically motivated. There's P2 and P3. P2 is Russia and China. P3 is the Western three nations who are sympathetic to the humanitarian plight.
Lamient,
yes,
we're out of time. I've got to move on.
Okay.
But I thank you so much for joining us. And it's a terrible situation for the Rohingya people. We hope their terrible plight is eased very soon. And that's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Next time, a special interview with the EU's Migration Commissioner. I'll ask him why European countries refuse to meet mandatory quotas to host refugees. Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.